In the picturesque town of Dunhill, where every street was lined with flowering dogwoods and homes boasted white picket fences, not everything was as perfect as it seemed. Daniel Whittaker, a respected architect, and his wife Julia, an art teacher at the local high school, had crafted what appeared to be a picture-perfect life. Their daughter Emily, a bright and sociable high school senior, was the center of their world, often hosting her friends and boyfriend, Michael, at their home. Michael had won the family over with his charm and politeness, quickly becoming a fixture in their lives. But beneath the surface of this suburban bliss, secrets lingered, dark and unspoken, threatening to unravel the life Daniel had worked so hard to build. Daniel and Michael were having a secret gay affair. At first, it was just harmless exchanges, lingering looks and playful banter that seemed innocent enough. But soon, Daniel and Michael's connection began to deepen. Drawn to Michael's easygoing charm and unpredictable nature, which stood in stark contrast to Daniel's meticulous and orderly life, Daniel found himself seeking out more opportunities to spend time with him. What started as casual hangouts slowly morphed into something neither of them could ignore. Their conversations grew more intimate, their closeness undeniable. Before long, their encounters crossed a line, turning physical, as the magnetic pull between them became impossible to resist. Not only Michael had captured Emily's heart, but he had also earned Daniel's respect. His politeness and charm made him a frequent guest at the Whittaker home, where he was always eager to lend a hand. As the harshness of winter gave way to the promise of spring, Emily found herself increasingly preoccupied with college applications and scholarship interviews. Her busy schedule often left Michael and Daniel to their own devices. It was during this time that Daniel enlisted Michael's help with a new project, a backyard shed that was meant to be a sanctuary from the impending quiet of Emily's departure for college. The project provided Daniel and Michael numerous afternoons together where they bonded over the intricacies of building something lasting from the ground up. As they measured, sawed, and hammered away, the work was physically demanding but fulfilling, and it became customary for them to end the day sitting on the makeshift porch of the shed, sharing a couple of beers and talking about life. Michael, who had grown up without a father, found in Daniel a mentor who listened more than he spoke, who guided without pushing, and who shared a passion for craftsmanship. It was perhaps this admiration that slowly blurred the lines between them one evening when a casual pat on the back lingered a little too long, or a laugh ended with an unexpected gaze that held too long. Their relationship had crossed into dangerous, uncharted territory. Neither could pinpoint the exact moment the change occurred, but a complex tension began to build, a mix of confusion, denial, and an attraction that felt dangerously like desire. Daniel was taken aback by the stirring of feelings he couldn't quite understand. He was a devoted husband and father, and yet he found himself anticipating the weekends with a keenness that transcended the simple joy of building a shed. As the structure neared completion, so did their unacknowledged truth. Their interactions became charged with an electric current, quick to smile, quick to touch, quick to step into each other's personal space. Their conversations drifted from mundane topics to personal dreams and fears. Daniel learned of Michael's insecurities about his future, his doubts about being good enough for Emily, and his deeper unspoken fears of abandonment. Julia, perceptive as ever, noticed the subtle changes. She saw the light in Daniel's eyes when he spoke of their weekend plans, the way he seemed more present, yet somehow distant, when Michael was around. A silent question raised itself in her heart, one she wasn't ready to confront. She chose instead to watch, to wait, and to hope that her suspicions were unfounded. But as summer approached, bringing with it the end of Emily's high school journey and the beginning of something new, Daniel and Michael found themselves at a crossroads. Standing in the nearly finished shed on one balmy evening, surrounded by the scent of fresh wood and the waning sunlight, a seemingly innocuous conversation about college turned into a confession. "Daniel, I think I might be—" Michael's voice trailed off, the weight of his unspoken words hanging heavy between them. Daniel looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just Emily's boyfriend or the helpful young man he'd come to know, but a person terrified of what his feelings might mean. "It's okay," Daniel found himself saying, his voice more steady than he felt. "It's okay to be unsure, to explore who you are." The relief in Michael's eyes was palpable, and in that moment, they crossed a line they could never return from. As they stood there, the dusk casting long shadows around them, the shed they had built together was no longer just a structure in Daniel's backyard. It had become a symbol of their shared secret, a secret that, once exposed, could unravel the very fabric of their lives. But the story doesn't end there. In the heart of Dunhill, secrets have a way of surfacing, and the consequences can be more devastating than anyone could have imagined. Despite the project's completion, Daniel and Michael found reasons to spend time together. As the days grew longer and the shadows of doubt deepened, the shed, once a hub of laughter and teamwork, transformed into a clandestine meeting place for Daniel and Michael. With the project officially completed, there was no real reason for them to continue their daily meetings, yet they found themselves drawn back to that small structure at the edge of the garden, now a sanctuary for their growing connection. Inside the confines of the shed, surrounded by the tools and remnants of their work, their conversations deepened and their bond intensified. These were no longer dialogues about carpentry or college plans, but confessions of personal dreams, fears, and desires that they dared not voice in the daylight. The space between them, once filled with casual banter, now pulsed with a more profound energy. On one such evening, as twilight bathed the backyard in a soft glow, Michael hesitated at the threshold before entering. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut wood, a smell that had come to signify their secret encounters. Daniel was already inside, pretending to organize tools that didn't need organizing. As Michael stepped in, closing the door behind him, the click of the latch sounded unnervingly final. "Beautiful evening," Michael remarked, his voice low, almost tentative. Daniel nodded, his back to Michael as he fiddled with a can of varnish. "Yes, it is," he replied, the simplicity of the conversation belying the complexity of his thoughts. The silence that followed was charged, heavy with unspoken words. Michael moved closer, his steps slow and deliberate on the wooden floor. When he reached Daniel, he didn't stop, didn't speak, just stood there, close enough for Daniel to feel the warmth radiating from his body. It was Daniel who turned around, his hands stained with varnish, his eyes searching Michael's face for an indication of his thoughts. Without a word, Michael reached out, his hand brushing against Daniel's, a touch that sent a jolt through them both. It was the same electrifying contact that had first crossed the line of their friendship weeks ago, only now it was deeper, more deliberate. Daniel's breath hitched, and he met Michael's gaze, the air around them thick with anticipation. The first kiss was hesitant, a mere whisper of lips that spoke of fear and longing. But as the initial shock of their boldness subsided, a second kiss followed, this one firmer, more assured. They were no longer mentor and mentee, but two individuals, bound by a secret that grew heavier with each passing day. Their meetings became more frequent, each one a mix of guilt and exhilaration. They would talk, kiss, hold each other, and then part ways with a lingering touch, a promise of more. These moments, stolen in the quiet hours of early evening, became their refuge from the expectations and roles they played in the daylight. Yet with each secret rendezvous, the risk of discovery loomed larger. They began taking precautions, checking for Julia or Emily's presence before slipping into the shed. They spoke in hushed tones, always listening for footsteps on the gravel path that led from the house. Daniel knew they were treading on dangerous ground. The intensity of his feelings for Michael scared him, not just because of their implications, but because of the potential hurt it could bring to their families. He found himself caught between his duty as a husband and father and the unexpected passion that Michael had ignited in him. Michael, too, felt the strain. The secrecy of their relationship weighed on him, clouding his thoughts and darkening his moments with Emily. He loved her in his way, but what he felt with Daniel was different, confusing, and overwhelmingly intense. It was a love that asked for more than he might be capable of giving without destroying everything else in his wake. As the summer heat intensified, so did the complexity of their situation. Each stolen moment, each kiss, each whispered promise added layers to their secret, making the inevitable reveal more dangerous and potentially devastating. They were building a house of cards on a foundation of silence, and both Daniel and Michael knew it was only a matter of time before everything came tumbling down. But in the following days, Michael, grappling with his burgeoning feelings and the confusion over his identity, began to withdraw slightly. His interactions with Emily strained. Emily, intuitive and sensitive, sensed the shift in Michael's demeanor. She questioned him, her voice tinged with concern, but his responses were evasive, always diverting back to the stress of impending college decisions and his uncertain future. On the other side, Julia watched her husband with growing unease. Daniel had always been an open book, his joys, his frustrations transparent in his expressive eyes. But now there was a veil of secrecy, a distance that had crept into their conversations. He spent long hours in the shed, often just sitting on the porch, lost in thought. Julia's heart ached with the suspicion that something fundamental in their relationship was amiss. And it was only the beginning. One afternoon, as the town prepared for the annual 4th of July celebration, Julia approached Daniel while he was sorting through tools in the shed. "Daniel, we need to talk," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. The look Daniel gave her, a mix of resignation and defiance, confirmed her fears that their conversation was long overdue. "About what's been going on with you lately," Julia pressed on, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "You seem distant, distracted. Is there something you need to tell me?" Daniel paused, his hands still. The air between them felt charged, heavy with the weight of his secrets. "It's nothing, Julia. Just stressed with work and the changes coming up with Emily leaving for college," he lied, avoiding her gaze. Julia nodded, not convinced but reluctant to push further without more evidence. As the town's fireworks lit up the night sky, casting an eerie glow over the faces of the revelers, Emily pulled Michael aside into the shadows, away from the celebration's noise and light. Her eyes, usually so full of warmth and laughter, now mirrored the flickering tension that the fireworks cast against the dark sky. "Michael, we need to talk," she began, her voice a mix of tenderness and resolve. Michael looked at her, noticing the serious furrow in her brow, an expression he wasn't accustomed to seeing aimed at him. "You've been different," she continued, her words careful but direct. "It's like I'm not even there when you look at me anymore. Are you having second thoughts about us? About everything we've planned?" Michael's heart felt like it was being squeezed, in a vice. The guilt of his secret emotions was a constant weight, but seeing the worry etched on Emily's face added a new layer of pain. He took a deep breath, his mind racing for the right words, words that wouldn't hurt her, wouldn't betray the complex truth he was living. "No, Em, it's not you," he said, his voice shaky despite his efforts to sound confident. "I've just been really stressed. College decisions, the future, it's a lot." Emily stepped closer, reaching out to touch his arm. Her touch, once a source of comfort, now felt like a question mark hanging in the air between them. "But it's more than that, Michael. It's like you're pulling away from me. You're here, but you're not really with me. If there's something wrong, we can figure it out together. Isn't that what we always said? We're a team, aren't we?" Michael looked down at her hand on his arm, feeling a wave of longing and regret. He wanted to confess everything, to tell her about the confusion that had taken root in his heart, about the feelings for Daniel that he couldn't understand or control. But how could he explain something he barely understood himself without risking everything? "Emily, I promise you, you mean everything to me. Nothing has changed about how I feel for you," he said, forcing himself to meet her eyes, hoping his own didn't betray the turmoil inside. "It's just, this summer has been a lot. The project with your dad, it's taken more out of me than I expected." Emily's gaze didn't waver. "Michael, if it's just the stress, why do I feel like you're hiding something from me? There's a difference in you that scares me. It's like I'm living with a stranger, not the person I thought I knew." The desperation in her voice struck a chord within him. Michael felt the facade he had been desperately clinging to start to crack. I am scared too," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "Scared of losing you, scared of what these changes mean. I'm trying to figure out a lot about who I am. Please just... Can we take things one day at a time? I need to sort through this mess in my head." Emily nodded slowly, the fear in her eyes softening slightly to make room for a cautious understanding. "I love you, Michael. I don't want to lose you, but I can't help you if you don't let me in. Whatever it is, we can face it together. Please don't shut me out." The promise in her words was a lifeline, but Michael felt as if he were drowning, the weight of his secret keeping him submerged. He nodded, pulling her into a hug, feeling her warmth against the cold fear inside him. "Thank you, Em. I'm going to try. I promise. Just give me a little time," he murmured into her hair, knowing that the road ahead would test the bounds of their bond, possibly shattering it forever. As they stood there, the fireworks continued to burst above them, each explosion a stark contrast to the silent battle raging within Michael, a reminder of the turmoil that threatened to undo the life they had built together. Later that night, Daniel found himself standing next to Michael, their shoulders almost touching. The crackle and burst of colors above them mirrored the chaos of emotions Daniel felt inside. He knew he had to make a decision soon, to confront the nature of his feelings and the repercussions they might bring, but he didn't. Not yet. The weeks that followed were a blur of unspoken words and stolen glances, the fabric of their 4 lives. Daniel, Julia, Emily, and Michael became strained, each thread pulling taut, ready to snap. Then, late one August evening, the inevitable happened. Julia, unable to shake her suspicions, followed Daniel out to the shed under the pretense of bringing him a drink. As Julia neared the shed, the muffled voices of Daniel and Michael floated through the cool evening air, weaving a thread of tension that pulled at her already frayed nerves. She hesitated at the door, the shadows within only partially revealing the 2 figures inside. Daniel's voice was low, a tender timbre that Julia had not heard in years, even when he spoke to her. "Michael, we need to think about how we proceed from here," he said, his words careful, measured. "What we have, it's grown beyond what either of us expected. I can't just be your mentor or your friend anymore, not after everything." Michael stood a few feet away, a conflicted expression etched across his young face. The dim light from the overhead bulb cast shadows that seemed to accentuate his inner turmoil. "I know, Daniel," he replied, his voice shaky. "But it's also overwhelming. I came into your family's life as Emily's boyfriend, and now I don't know where I stand with anyone, not even with myself." Daniel took a step closer, closing the distance between them with a palpable urgency. "Look at me, Michael," he urged, his hand reaching out to gently lift Michael's chin, forcing their eyes to meet. "You stand right here with me. We stand together in whatever comes next. But we have to be careful. We can't let this, whatever this is, destroy the people we care about." Michael's eyes glistened, a mix of gratitude and fear swimming within them. "It's just that every time I think about ending this, about walking away, I can't," he confessed, his voice cracking with emotion. "I don't want to lose this, lose you. But I'm terrified of what it means for Emily, for your family." Daniel's hand lingered on Michael's face, the gesture tender but fraught with the weight of their secret. "I'm terrified too," Daniel admitted, a rare crack in his composed facade. "But we've crossed a line I never thought I'd approach. We can't undo what's happened, Michael. We can only decide where we go from here." The air around them thickened as they both considered the gravity of their situation. Michael leaned into the warmth of Daniel's touch, seeking solace in the man who had become so much more than a father figure. "I wish we could just run away from it all," Michael murmured, half in jest, yet half in desperate longing. Daniel sighed, a sound that seemed to carry both regret and desire. "And go where? Start anew where no one knows us? That's not a solution, Michael. We have responsibilities, commitments to our families." His voice hardened slightly, the reality of their predicament settling in. "We can't be selfish, not now." "But isn't hiding our feelings being dishonest? Isn't that a form of selfishness too?" Michael challenged, pulling away slightly to gauge Daniel's reaction. Daniel paused, the conflict evident in his expression. Maybe it is. But think about the damage that the truth could do. It's not just about us. It's about Emily, Julia. It's about not tearing apart an entire family over something that we still don't fully understand. Michael nodded slowly, his heart heavy. So what are we doing then? Are we just supposed to pretend that nothing's changed? That we don't feel... Stop, Daniel interjected, his tone firm yet scared. We can't talk like that here. Not now. It's too risky. Anyone could overhear. It was then that the sound of shattering glass pierced the night, slicing through their bubble of isolated conversation. They both froze, hearts racing as the harsh reality of their situation came crashing down around them. The door swung open, and there stood Julia, her face a mask of shock and devastation, the remnants of the glass she had dropped glittering ominously at her feet. Their secret, once confined to the shadows of unspoken words and stolen moments, was now laid bare under the unforgiving light of truth, as Julia's world, and theirs, began to unravel. The confrontation was swift and heartbreaking. Accusations and confessions spilled out under the harsh light of the shed's single bulb. Julia's pain was palpable, her voice cracking as she demanded the truth. Daniel, overcome with guilt, admitted to the emotional affair, his words falling like blows upon the fragile structure of their family life. Michael, equally shattered, apologized to Julia, the gravity of their actions sinking in. He looked over at Emily, who stood behind her mother, her expression one of betrayal and confusion. And that's where all the real drama started. The following days were tumultuous. Daniel moved into the guest room, his relationship with Julia strained to its limits. Michael, racked with guilt, ended things with Emily, unable to reconcile his actions with the love he had professed for her. As the summer drew to a close, the tension reached a breaking point. Michael, desperate to find solace and unable to face Julia, ventured into the woods where he and Daniel had spent many afternoons. Lost in his turmoil, he didn't see the figure following him until it was too late. As the long shadows of the August evening stretched across the woods of Dunhill, the air was laden with a tense silence that forbid the coming storm. Julia, consumed by a tumultuous mix of fear and suspicion, trailed behind Daniel as he made his way into the dense thicket. Her hands trembled, clutching a flashlight that cast eerie shadows on the ground, her heart pounding against her ribcage with each step. Daniel, unaware of being followed, moved with a purposeful stride towards a familiar clearing, where he and Michael had agreed to meet. Michael, with his own turmoil boiling beneath a calm facade, waited anxiously, hoping to mend fences and find some resolution to the emotional chaos that had ensnared them all. As Julia approached the edge of the clearing, she stopped, concealed behind the brush. The voices of the two men floated towards her, their tones laced with a desperate intensity that sliced through the quiet woods. "Michael, we can't keep doing this. It's tearing us apart." Daniel's voice broke the silence, his words heavy with emotion. "I know, Daniel, but I don't know how to just stop feeling," Michael replied, his voice cracking. What we have, it's real, isn't it real to you? It is, but it's not just about us." Daniel's frustration was palpable. "There's Julia, Emily, I can't destroy our lives, our family." The conversation escalated quickly as old wounds were opened, each man grappling with the gravity of their situation. Julia listened, each word a piercing confirmation of the betrayal she had suspected, but never wanted to believe. Unable to contain her anguish, Julia stepped into the clearing, her presence startling both men. The flashlight in her hand trembled violently, casting surreal patterns of light and shadow across the scene. "How could you?" she cried out, her voice a mixture of rage and heartbreak. Daniel turned, shock registering on his face as he saw his wife. "Julia, But before he could explain, Michael interjected. "Julia, please understand, it wasn't supposed to happen like this." The tension in the air thickened, a tangible force that seemed to constrict around Julia's heart. Overwhelmed by a torrent of emotions, she confronted Daniel with the years of trust and love she had invested in him, now shattered before her eyes. As the argument intensified, voices raised and accusations hurled, the situation spiraled dangerously out of control. In a moment of heated anguish, Daniel, trying to calm the situation, reached out towards Julia. Misinterpreting his gesture, Michael stepped forward, protective and defensive. The chaos that followed was a blur. Julia, reacting instinctively in a flood of fear and desperation, felt her hand strike something hard against Michael's figure. A knife, forgotten in the confusion and carried by Daniel for cutting through the dense underbrush, found its unintended mark. Michael staggered back, a look of disbelief on his face as he clutched his chest, where the knife had struck. The woods fell silent but for the sound of his labored breathing. Daniel froze, horror-stricken, as the reality of what had happened dawned on him. Julia dropped the flashlight, the light spinning away into the darkness, her hands covering her mouth in horror. "What have I done?" she whispered, her voice lost amidst the rustling leaves. Moments later, Emily, who had followed her mother into the woods, drawn by a dreadful premonition, arrived at the clearing. The sight that greeted her, a tableau of tragedy with her father standing over Michael, her mother in shock, and Michael bleeding on the forest floor, was too much to grasp. "Mom? Dad? Michael?" Emily's voice, filled with confusion and fear, broke the heavy silence. She rushed to Michael, kneeling beside him, her hands trembling as she tried to stem the flow of blood. "Hold on, Michael, please." Daniel, coming to his senses, desperately dialed for emergency services, his voice cracking as he spoke to the operator. Julia, meanwhile, stood frozen, her mind a whirlwind of guilt and disbelief. As emergency responders arrived, it was too late. Michael's injuries were fatal and he succumbed to them, lying on the cold ground of the woods that had once been a place of secret meetings and hidden emotions. In the aftermath of Michael's tragic death, the town of Dunhill found itself grappling with a sense of disbelief. How could such a grisly murder happen in the heart of their quiet, close-knit community? The Daniel Whittaker they had known, an esteemed architect, a loving husband and father, was now forever associated with a horrifying scandal. The trial that followed cast an unrelenting spotlight on the affair, forcing the townspeople to confront the darker side of human relationships. The courtroom became a battleground of emotions. Daniel, now facing charges of manslaughter, appeared shattered, a man whose life had unraveled in the blink of an eye. The public, once supportive, was divided. Some saw Daniel as a man who had made a terrible, impulsive mistake in a moment of panic and confusion, while others condemned him for the betrayal that had led to such a devastating end. Julia, standing by her husband despite everything, found herself at the center of public scrutiny. The weight of guilt and loss hung heavy on her. It was clear that Michael's death would haunt her forever, a life snuffed out not by malice but by a chain of decisions born out of fear and deceit. The woman who had once been Dunhill's beloved art teacher now found herself ostracized, her reputation tainted by association. Emily, once full of life and the joy of her youth, was left with the deepest scars. She had lost her boyfriend, her father had been revealed to be a man she no longer recognized, and her mother was left grappling with her own turmoil. For Emily, the world had shattered that night in the woods. In the months that followed, she distanced herself from her parents, needing time to come to terms with not only Michael's death, but the lies that had destroyed her family. As for the town of Dunhill, the tragedy sent ripples through the community. What was once a storybook suburb became a place where hushed whispers followed the Whittaker family wherever they went. The house on Maple Street now stood empty. It was sold within a year, the new owners unaware of the dark history it held. Through this tragedy, the people of Dunhill were forced to reckon with the hidden cracks that run beneath the surface of even the most stable-looking lives. The truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds its way to the surface, often with devastating consequences. The story of Daniel Whittaker and Michael became a lasting warning. Secrets, no matter how carefully concealed, have the power to destroy lives.